everybody. Welcome to the Ministrybuilders.Church podcast. My name is Wayne Lanier, and it is just such an honor that you would take some time and tune into this podcast. And our goal is to have conversations that would help you as pastors, as leaders, as followers of Jesus. Our passion is for the local church, and we want to see the local church make more disciples, grow more leaders, and equip more people for the work of the ministry. And so our hope and our desire is that these conversations that we share in these podcasts will just go a long way into helping you, encouraging you, equipping you, stirring your thinking up, and maybe we'll give you some tools along the way through our guests. And so I am just blessed and thankful to have my friend, Dr. Rick Marks, on with us today. Dr. Rick, good to see you, sir.
It is always a pleasure to be in your presence, my friend.
Man, it's great to have you. And we're sharing in the Gray Beard Club. You and I. And,
Yeah.
got it.
My wife, Luella, my wife never liked facial hair, and I decided about 2 years ago I'm growing it anyways to match my voice. Now she actually likes it.
Well, good.
Figure
That's a
that
positive.
out.
That's a good thing.
I know.
I guess pun intended, it grew on her, right? So, okay.
It did.
So,
Yeah.
Age
60. Age 60. I decided to go ahead and go. I'm going to grow it anyway. So,
all right, great.
Glad I did.
Great. Well, Dr. Marks is well, in my opinion, he's a great expert in the world of relationships and communication and all of those things. And so that's what our conversation is going to be about today. We're going to talk about healthy communication around leadership and life. But before we get into all of that, Dr. Marks, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell everybody a little bit about you and who you are, your background, family, whatever, and what you do and that sort of thing.
So I've got a PhD in counseling psychology, a master's in ministry therapy, another master's in education, actually all from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. I was licensed for 30 years as a professional counselor and an ordained minister. I legally do all my work as an ordained minister. But really, as Wayne, as you well know my story, the reason I do what I do is because I grew up in a broken home where there was abuse and addictions and craziness, a divorced home. And then my dad remarried, and none of us kids ever bonded to my dad emotionally or my stepmother. My wife, who I met when I joined the Navy in 1980, I met her here in Jacksonville, Florida, which is where I live now. She grew up in an alcoholic home with a lot of craziness and abuse as well. So two broken people found each other. And though we loved each other, we did not know how to love well because we never saw healthy love. It was never modeled. We didn't know what it looked like. I was not raised as a Christian. I became a Christian right out of high school. I was dating a girl who was a Christian, and it was through her influence and the influence of her family and their church that I gave my heart to Jesus. But here's what I learned, Wayne. If you're dysfunctional when you get saved, guess what? You're dysfunctional after you get saved. Or I like to say it now this way, Christianity is not immunity from your humanity. And so even though I was a believer, saved, Romans 10:9, confess and believe, I still had a lot of baggage and I had a lot of growing up to do and healing to do. We are 39 years of marriage, and I've got 3 adult children. And much of the things I teach today on healthy relationships and leadership, those are things I raised my kids on, because I wanted my children to be healthy, mature adults when they became adults, not trying to figure out as adults like my wife and I had to in our early, mid to late 20s, early 30s. So I run a ministry called Relate Well Institute, which is named after our curriculum, which is called Relate Well. And in Relate Well, we actually teach people, anybody, the core fundamental skills and principles for healthy, mature relationships so that we can love maturely. I tell people you can't love maturely if you don't know how to relate well. And most people today in culture don't know how to relate well because they never saw it. I didn't. So all of our work is biblically sound, and I would say clinically astute because it's research-based. And what we do is we teach churches how to relate well. We train marriage mentors to use our core curriculum called Relate Well to work with other couples who are struggling, to empower them to know different, to do different. So that's kind of a lot of what we do. Been around for a long time. if people are interested, go to relatewell.us and kind of learn about it there.
Yeah, awesome,
So,
awesome. And by
and
the way,
of course,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Rick.
I would say, and of course, you know our work. You've seen it and been involved with it for so
Yeah,
many years. So you know the impact that it can take, particularly a highly distressed marriage, and
yeah,
turn them around. And like in our 3-day intensive, really turn them around
yeah.
by empowering them to do something different.
Yeah, totally. And by the way, I'll include a link to the Relate Well website. It'll be in the description below the video here. You'll find a link there to Dr. Marks's website, and I just highly encourage you to check that out. And I have to add, Dr. Marks, that it definitely has been my experience that over quite a number of years, uh, especially those, and in particularly those highly distressed couples, having them go through those intensives is just, I've just never, I don't know how to say this. I've never seen anything like it to be able to help get them unstuck and moving back into a positive direction. There's a lot of variables in that, but it's been a very fruitful endeavor. So I want to talk about, Dr. Marks. We're talking about leadership and healthy communication, but I
Mm-hmm.
guess maybe we should start with, would you just talk a little bit about, because this phrase healthy communication is thrown around a lot. Healthy whatever, we tag healthy to lots of things.
Right.
um,
Right.
so would you talk just a little bit about how we're defining what healthy means in terms of communication, and then we can move that over into talking specifically around leadership. But let's talk a little bit about what is healthy communication even look like? What does that mean? How would we know if we ran
I,
into it?
I would say it this way, that healthy communication creates unity, understanding, and a connection. Unhealthy communication will create disunity, some source of hurt and pain, or misunderstanding. And so, whenever we communicate in healthy ways, that means I'm communicating, that person's listening, right? Because it's both and sender and receiver. That the message that I'm sending, it comes across in a loving, caring way. Scripture says, "Speak the truth." What? In love,
Yeah.
right? But people don't know what that means. What does it mean to speak the truth in love? I'll tell you, it's simple. And by the way, I like to say off the bat with our listeners, if I come across as simple, it's by design. I'm a closet redneck from North Georgia, right? But really, it's because it's my favorite quote, Wayne. It's by Einstein. Einstein was right about this. He said, "Make things simple, but not simpler." The brain learns best through simplicity, not complexity.
Hmm.
But you can simplify something too much, right? But simple is better. So I like simple. And for me, when you have a speaker or listener, if you're going to speak the truth in love, how would you know you're doing that? And the answer is simple: your tone. Well, we say it this way: love has a tone to it. Because the brain, research on the brain and communication makes it clear. The brain, a person's brain responds, actually reacts 92% to tone and body language, only 8% to the verbal message. So I tell people, mind your tone. That requires high self awareness and high self management in order to do that, right? But love has a tone to it. So healthy communication is, I'm going to speak my truth, but in a loving way. What does that mean? I'm speaking my truth so that I'm treating you, as we say in our world and Relate Well, I'm treating you with goodwill and respect, and in a caring way. That
Okay.
we believe you don't ever treat people disrespectfully or with ill will, even when you're communicating,
Wow. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's, so you said, you mentioned tone.
right?
So I think if there's anything that I've learned, and I learned a lot of this from you, I've learned a lot of this from, well, Pain actually. Uh, a lot of
Yeah,
mistakes, a lot of
yeah.
errors.
And we're not
Is
talking Thomas Paine.
Yeah, no, we're not talking Thomas Paine. We're not. No, no.
Uh,
Mr. Paine, but not that Mr. Paine. But
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
uh, what I've found was that, and what I've learned is that nonverbal communication is always believed above the words that we chose. And if
Yes.
I'm hearing you correctly, that's based upon tone, body language, facial expressions, all those types of
Yes.
things. Can you do, how do we how do we
Can
grow
I?
in this? Like how do we gain more self-awareness, I guess is the better question.
So I would let me kind of give a context, because you brought up something here that I think is really important for listeners to understand, particularly when it comes to leadership, but really in any relationship. The verbal communication is the weakest form of communication across the board. It's the weakest. All right. So if I say take out the trash, what does it mean? It just means take out the trash. However, you can give greater meaning by adding nonverbals to the verbal. So if I was to say, arms crossed, gal on my face, take out the trash, it's the same verbal message. But when I say take out the trash, what does take out the trash mean now? Well, it means you better do it, because the nonverbal, the tone and the body language gives meaning to that verbal statement. However, there's something else that's more powerful than even the nonverbal. And it's what's called the analog, analog, the analog of communication. And the audience is like, what is analog, Rick? It's simple. Analog is two things put together. It's the nonverbals and the context in which it is spoken. So, give you an example. I'll give you analog now with the same phrase: take out the trash. Take out the trash. And I'm standing in the kitchen looking at a trash can that's overflowing, and I'm talking to my 16-year-old son, whose chore it is to take out the trash, and he has not. So now you can ask the question: does take out the trash in that tone, in that context fit? You go, yeah, that fits. That fits. I can see why you'd say that in that context. Let me change the analog now. Take out the trash. Cotton candy this hand, popcorn in this hand, smile on my face, and I'm looking at my 60-year-old son, and we're at the state fair. Now, what does it mean? I don't know. The only person who knows is me. So I have to ask you what it means, because take out the trash in that context doesn't seem to fit, does it? Because they hire people to take out trash. So you'd have to ask me what it means, and I'm not going to try and figure it out. So I have to say, Rick, what do you mean by that? Because it doesn't seem like it fits to this context. He goes, oh, last week Trey was cutting, he didn't take out the trash, and I was just picking on him. Oh, got it. One of the things I've learned to listen to as a therapist and as a clinician, and really just a person now, I listen for analog. I hear what you say, and I hear the way you say it. But if you say you love me, and in the context in which you say it is you're consistently acting in an unloving way, it makes me go, I hear what you say, but the context in which you say it doesn't fit. You explain it to me. If you say you're a good boss, but the way you treat your employees on a regular basis contextually is you're disrespectful to them, what your verbal statement doesn't mean anything, because the context in which you say it doesn't fit. So what ends up happening is you make yourself look discredited. So I have to ask, what do you mean by that? Because the context doesn't fit what you say. And when you listen for analog, you get the greater meaning behind the verbal phrase. The analog has to fit the verbal phrase.
Right. So the analog, the context, all of those pieces
Context, yeah. The
are what.
context and the nonverbals is analog together.
So how, Dr. Marks, move this towards move this a little deeper into the leadership conversation.
Okay.
One of the things
So,
that I've noticed in particularly in pastoral leadership, in the context of local church and ministry, and this applies no matter what context of leadership, we we all want to have our this is our vision, this is our mission, we have our values, and we say that we value this, whatever those values are. One thing that I have noticed and discovered is that oftentimes how we do what we do, how and what we say is not congruent with what we have declared to be a value. So if I say that
Yes.
I value people, but my communication, my actions, my behavior does not line up with what I say I value, then those that I'm attempting to lead or care for, whatever that context is, work with, internally don't believe that I really do value that, even though I've said that that's what I value, because I've communicated something different. So I went a
And
long way around to say, let's talk about this in the context of leadership specifically.
that would be integrity issue. Think about it. Just a fundamental, it's an integrity issue. Because, and again, when you say I care about people, but contextually you actually don't, that creates an integrity issue. What you say isn't fitting what you did. Now, you know my background. I served on a mega church many years ago. Um, I learned from that experience. I would rather work in a secular company.
Mm,
Hate to say it, because though it was a mega church, communication was always top down, disrespectful, don't question, do what we tell you.
mm,
It was emotionally abusive at times with people and about control and power with the upper level. That is what people in the corporate world today call a lack of emotional intelligence. So, just going to kind of take a side note, we'll get back to what you're asking about. Think about it this way, and I no disrespect to the John Maxwells of the world, those kind of things, all right? But I've always said, based on my work and what I do, is if you go to a John Maxwell training and you're still emotionally a child, at the end of the day, you haven't helped that person, because all you've done is weaponize an emotional child who's in a leadership position to use what they learned against the people they lead. That true leadership, healthy leadership, mature leadership must flow from a mature personality. The leading trainings that are taking place in the secular world is all about what was known as emotional intelligence, right? I use the word emotional wellness. I like that better. Yet, when my son was in Beijing at Tsinghua University, which is their Harvard, studying a master's in global affairs there, he called me. This is back in 2020. He's still there in Beijing at the university. He said, "Dad, we get global leaders from global companies speak to us every week, and leaders from nations come speak to us every week here." He said, "They're all saying the same thing you taught us as kids." And I said, "What's that?" "They're telling us that if we want to be great leaders in the future, we better master humility and empathy." Now, think about that, Wayne. It's the secular world pushing humility and empathy as leadership. And I said to Jesse, that's interesting. That's really the language of the church.
yeah.
And it's the secular world pushing. So I believe, because to live a life of humility and empathy is a way of being, right? It
Mm-hmm.
requires emotional maturity. So if we're not healthy, mature adults, then you're really not going to communicate well, because your immaturity, particularly in conflict, and when this part shows up, is going to come across in unhealthy, immature ways. So healthy leadership, first and foremost, flows from, I'll use the corporate language, emotional intelligence, but it really flows from someone who's matured in love. Thinking about 1 Corinthians 13 and others, when we mature in love as a way of being, then we'll communicate in loving ways, even in conflict, more often than not. So true leadership flows from who you are, not the skills you've learned. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So how do we help? And I guess maybe I want to take the conversation in kind of in this direction of
Okay.
how do we help specifically pastors, leaders, especially those involved in Christian ministry work. Of course, this applies across the board, but how do we help them what are some ways that they can begin, or some pathways, or what, I don't know the right terminology, that they can take to begin to grow in that emotional maturity, to begin to grow in that part of their life, so that they gain more of that awareness to communicate from that place of love.
So I would argue, this is going to be a kind of a weird way. Some all these listeners may think of it as a weird way, but hang with me. The first place you have to go to is you have to see it as a value.
Mm.
You have to value not leadership skills, but becoming a healthy, mature leader. They're not the same. So for me, it was 1994. And sadly, it was when I was confronted, I had not earned the right to come from my wife because I was emotionally a child when I got married. I dealt with things in childish ways. And then when the pain threshold and the truth of that became too great, no one drove my transformation. I drove it myself. I just said, I'm not being that guy anymore. I'm changing. And I went and found the best practices. I went and got mentors. I started applying what I was learning right away. Right away. Why? Because it became a value. I am changing me. I'm not being that person anymore. I think part of because you and I are really big on discipleship, and this is really what it's about.
Yeah.
I think somehow our value, and I don't mean to minimize evangelism, so don't, to the listeners, don't take this that way. But why is evangelical church with high divorces, high broken families? Because our value is not maturing in love. Our value is getting people saved, spirit regeneration, but not soul transformation
Mm-hmm.
to mature people in love. And according to 1 Corinthians 13, you can faith, hope, and love, but the greatest is love. I've come to realize the goal of the gospel isn't to get people saved. It's to get them saved to mature them in love.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing we have to do is value maturity and love. I want to be someone different. Then from that, I can learn the skills and tools, how to communicate well, how to self-regulate well, how to be slow to anger and quick to hear. That requires regulation of the lower order brain, right? How
Right.
to do those Bible verses. But to do that requires maturity, emotional maturity. Because you can be a very intellectually smart person, but a very emotionally immature person. And so I think the first piece is value transformation, and be aware of where you really are. And that's the tough part. Looking in the mirror and owning your own stuff as a leader takes courage.
Mm.
Requires humility, but it takes courage.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easier to look out the window, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Look at the speck in somebody else's eye than the log.
Right.
I like mirror. It takes courage to look in the mirror. So
Yeah.
first thing I would say is look in the mirror. Go do the work on yourself as a leader as well, because great leaders, I see a difference. Can we teach leadership in churches and businesses on emotional wellness? There's a difference between a manager and a leader.
Right.
Sadly, the people that I've worked for in the church were managers, they weren't leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Managers treat people disrespectfully. Managers push people. Managers treat people as objects. Leaders walk alongside with people. They honor and respect their dignity as people.
Mm-hmm.
They're very different ways of being. And I wanted to be a leader, not a manager,
Yeah.
because I had some really great leaders when I was, particularly in the Navy. I think about Senior Chief Frank Busher. Here I am, a 19-year-old third-class petty officer, scared as can be, and that man treated me with great dignity and respect. He was a leader. He built me up. He encouraged me and taught me that I can succeed. I can be better. I think leaders do that, but it flows from who they are.
Wow. You're. I just gotta have lots of things just flowing through my mind as you talk about that. This conversation about becoming that person,
Mm-hmm.
desiring to be the person. I, I think I look at it like, if you become that person, if you become the person that treats others with dignity and respect, then you will treat others with dignity and respect, because it
Very
flows
much so.
from who you are. I'm thinking about, and I'm remembering the time where in the scriptures where the 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 religious leader comes to Jesus and he's asking him about the greatest commandment and loving God all your heart, mind, soul, strength. And then Jesus says, and love your neighbors yourself. So those were all scriptures of which this leader was very familiar with. And
Very
then the
much so.
leader asked Jesus the question, well, then who is my neighbor? Premise being, show me, define the people that I'm supposed to treat a certain way so that I know who they are. Let me get everybody in their right classification. Groups of
Yes,
people have right. Let me get everybody in the right
us
classification.
us versus them.
Yeah. And so then what I love about what's so to me just kind of mind-blowing about the story is Jesus launches into this parable, and we all know the story, the Good Samaritan story. Then at the end of the parable, Jesus asked the man the question, so who was the neighbor? Not who was treated neighborly, who was the neighbor in this story? So the guy entered. There's the obvious person who helped the man who had been robbed and beaten, and then Jesus says, "Go, be like him." Now,
Yes.
go be that person. And I think we find that over and over and over again. This is exactly what Jesus taught. You pointed out, the log out of your own eye before you're trying all that stuff, right? We have to become that person. And it really does, I think, come from desire. I mean, so many times I like you, and I think most of us, it's rare that and if we have had good role models, we should be amazingly grateful and thankful. But
Eh,
many of us in a lot of our contexts, we didn't have that, or maybe, whatever all of our dysfunctions were, which we all have. And so it was that way for me. I didn't understand how I came across. So I remember one time my situation, whatever had happened, and I don't even remember what I had done, and I apologized to my wife, and later on we're having a conversation, and then I made the statement to her. I said, well, I said I was sorry, didn't I? And her response was, "Yep, but you didn't tell your face that you were sorry." Right? And so that's when I realized I don't always communicate with all of me the things that I said with my mouth. And if those two things don't come together, the responsibility for communication is on me. The
yes.
my intent is not the determining factor. And for me to place my intent on somebody else and how I came across, that's not being responsible at all. And so I've learned that through a lot of pain
Now,
as well.
yeah. Now, what you're tapping into at this macro level that's being not verbalized is really self awareness.
Mm.
It's the lack of self awareness of how we come across, and yet we know through research that the first hurdle you have to master to become a healthy, mature adult is self awareness. It was
Yeah.
2019. There was a national study released, and this national study, I was reading it to my wife when it was so. I chuckled. I said, "Look here. This national study reveals 78% of Americans report that they're self aware. Yet that same study revealed, in reality, though, only 26% of Americans are actually self aware."
Mm-hmm.
So I was chuckling. She said, "What's so funny?" I said, "Well, think this through. Most people aren't self aware to know they're not self aware. That three-fourths of Americans lack self awareness, which is the first competency of what we know as emotional maturity, emotional intelligence today." And so, in my transformation, I came up with a phrase for myself a long time ago. The way I think I come across is not the way I do come across. The way I think that I'm being experienced is not the way that I am being experienced. And what I realized in my own growing and transforming was Luella doesn't know how I think I am or believe I am. Those who work for me don't know how I think I am or how I believe I'm being experienced. All they know is how I'm being experienced. And the disconnect between how I think I am and how I am is the problem. That healthy communication, the way I'm coming across, is exactly the intended way I want to come across. I'm so self aware, I know how I'm coming across. And that's where I had to be. I had to start becoming that person because I used to think that I was saying something in a kind way, but I really wasn't. And I'd get defensive. And then I go, well, that wasn't my intent. They'll go, well, I don't know your intent, but I do know what you did, you know? And I always tell people, don't defend your motive over your method.
Mm.
Because when you defend your motive over your method, you just sent the message, I don't care.
Wow.
Just because you didn't intend to shoot that person that you went hunting with that day doesn't take away the fact you still shot him.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go, well, I didn't mean to shoot you, they don't really care. They
Yeah.
still have a bullet in their side.
Yeah.
And whenever you hurt something that you didn't intend to, I've learned it only just begs the question, does it matter to you that what you did still caused pain? And the answer is yes. Move to humility. Say, forgive me. It was not my intent to hurt you.
Yeah.
Then come back and make it right and say what you want to say that way, in a better way. I think that's maturity, particularly for leaders. Um, and I think this is very important because if there's a disconnect between the two, we as leaders lose our integrity to talk about Jesus' love.
Mm.
We lose our integrity for trust, et cetera, et cetera. In 2005, I did a training for the Florida Tax Collectors Association's annual conference, and they asked me to do a training on healthy relationships in the workplace. And I'll speed up the conversation, but 30 minutes into my talk, Wayne, to about 100 and something people in the room, breakout session on healthy relationships in the workplace, my cell phone rang. It's 2005. I answered the phone, turned my back on the class, and this is what they heard. Hello? No, I'm teaching a class right now. No, I told you to call me during the day. Well, I don't really care. Fine, don't do it again. Whatever. Yeah, all right, I'll see you tonight. It's flip phone. I closed my flip phone, turned around, and I continued teaching. Guy on the back left, I don't know how long it was, interrupted me. He said, excuse me, Dr. Marks. I said, yes. He said, was that your wife on the phone? I said, yes, it was. Why? He goes, you just talked to her that way? And Wayne, I did. I answered it this way. I said, what way? Oh, Wayne, the tension in the room escalated. People shifting in their seats.
Mm-hmm.
And he challenged me back. He said, you're here to talk to us about healthy relations in the workplace, and you just talk to your wife that way? I said, you don't like it? And that room was filled with ice cold tension. They felt it, and I felt it. We're standing there in this impasse. And I broke the silence. And I said, y'all feel tension in this room? They're like, uh-huh. So the proctor for the room, her name was Nancy. I asked Nancy, I said, Nancy, would you do me a favor? She said, yes. I said, you inform this class what I asked you to do. And she got up and she said, Dr. Marks asked me 30 minutes into his lecture, call his cell phone, ring it 3 times, and, hang up. And I said, did you do it? She said, yes. And I read her phone number off my phone. And then I looked at the class and smiled and go, now you know I set you up. And then I had 2 short conversations for him. The first one was this. One action on my part, I changed all of you. Don't tell me you can't change another person. One action on my part, I changed everybody in this room. And I didn't just change you, I changed the environment in the room.
Wow.
This room was warm until I did what I did. Everyone felt the tension. How often do you do that at work or at home? You don't know, you don't care. And then I asked the second question. And here's a second short conversation. If I continued teaching, would you listen to me? And a lady in the middle of the room went, no. As a matter of fact, I was about to get up and walk out on you. I said, now let's put a context around this. Okay, I told her, thank you, but let's put a context. I got a PhD, 2 master's degrees. I teach around the country on healthy relationships and leadership. You would have listened to me? And Wayne, here's what she said. No, Dr. Marks, because in that moment, listen to her words, you lost the credibility to teach me.
Wow.
And I said, folks, that's all I want you to learn. I think in some ways in the church, when we get up there and preach or we minister to people, and yet back in the church day in and day out or at home, you're unloving, you're unkind, your words out there mean nothing to them.
Mm-hmm.
Why? It's who you are at home that's the real you. It's who you are Monday through Friday, dealing with your staff. That's the real you. Your staff don't believe your faith. And thus, I hate to say it, when I was at the church I was at, I didn't care to listen to the sermons at all. You want to know why? Who are you to teach me?
Yeah.
You don't believe it yourself. I hate to say it, but that's what it came down to.
Yeah. Wow.
They lost their credibility. And I had to become the person that who I am in private is the same person I am in public. And I knew the best place to hold myself accountable was to my kids.
Mm.
I always told my children, the man you see in public is not the same man in private, particularly at church. But then don't trust my faith. I'm a liar and a hypocrite. You know the real me.
Yeah.
I needed. That's an integrity issue.
Yeah.
So you're right. I think great leaders understand that, and they become whole individuals, so that who they are in private and in public is the same person, and that's integrity. If you're
Yeah.
mean in public and you're mean at home, well, that's a form of integrity, I guess, right?
Right. Right. Right.
He,
Right.
he's mean no matter what.
Yeah. And I think, you know, a point that I want to bring out in what you're saying is that this is not about being perfect people,
No, about
but this is where
maturity,
humility comes into play, and
very much.
emotional maturity, in that when I trespass, to use Jesus's words, when I trespass against you, I've offended you, I've done you wrong, I've treated you in a not good way, then when either that's brought to my attention, I become aware of it somehow, some way, that I have the stance of humility that says I will go. We are more important and more valuable than whatever the thing is, and so I'm going to come. I'm going to apologize. I'm going to find a way to make this right. I'm going to find a way to work through this in some way, because that requires the humility. Yeah, am I
Yes,
understand?
you're dead on. There are books being written quite a bit right now around empathy and humility in leadership. One of the ones I enjoy is a book called Humility, the New Smart. That if you want to be a great leader, you better learn to practice humility. Now, Jesus was humble to death on the cross. I mean, think about that level of humility. So, in Relate Well, and it was my core value system, which became Relate Well years later, our value system that we teach and Relate Well is what we call HREG. H equals REG. It's our value system. Humility equals respect, empathy, and goodwill. And we believe you always treat people with respect, you treat them with goodwill, and you treat them with empathy. You never send the message, I don't care. But you can't do respect, empathy, goodwill without humility. And so HREG, we call it internally, when I live a life of humility, respect, empathy, goodwill, then more often than not, I'm not harming relationships. Romans 12:18, Paul says, if at all possible, as far as concerns you, be at peace with all men, which basically means no matter what relationship I am, leader to subordinate, spouse, friend to friend, all right, Rick to an enemy. What Paul is saying, no matter what relationship you're in, your responsibility is to bring peace to the relationship, not angst, not conflict, not discord. That would require disrespect, a lack of empathy, and ill will, which is all linked to pride. So if I choose to live my life out of humility, respect, empathy, and goodwill, then by myself, I am bringing peace to the relationship. I am protecting what I call the us in our relationship. Now, you may not want a relationship with me, and I don't have any control over that. But HREG is our core value system that we teach in leadership, and a lot of businesses are now embracing HREG as a corporate value, a corporate culture. No matter what we do in this business, we will treat people with humility, respect, and goodwill. I just did a training for a Chick-fil-A store here recently, and I've done some for some healthcare companies where they're actually embracing HREG now and training all their employees in this value system to become this. Why? One, great work environment, right? Great work environment. It is more peace than pain in the work environment. You have healthy, strong work teams. Productivity goes up. And guess what? You keep your employees. You don't have high recidivism of turning employees over and over and over. Because what do we know today? People aren't leaving their jobs. That is not what the research shows. They're leaving their bosses. I've met with too many ministers who have left working at a church, not because they weren't called to ministry, They are sick and tired of being disrespected by the leaders.
Yeah.
It's true of the church as in the secular world.
Yeah. Yeah. And that it's been my experience as well. And I think it really does come back. And this is what I really appreciate about this conversation and about you is to put time, energy, and attention into helping, first of all, ourselves, but then to help those that we are called to disciple is the word, is the biblical word, right? But
Yes.
to help them grow as people because we value them as people requires that we function from a place of, as in the atrig, humility, respect, empathy, and goodwill. That is how we see people. I think the scriptural model starts with the fact that because we come from this fundamental premise that all men, all people are made in the
Mm-hmm.
image of God. We're God's imagers, that all things are held together by Him, that He's in all things and through all things, that all things are held together by, well, if we're held together by Him, then as Jesus said, if you've done it to the least of these, my brothers, you've done it to me.
To me.
So that worldview, that premise of life, that basic understanding is that we value one another because we recognize we've been valued. I guess another way of saying it is that we don't see the world through lack. That I don't need you to diminish in order for me to move up. There's plenty, there's abundance. God's world is filled with abundance. There's plenty of love and care and goodness. I always thought that my premise of communication for the longest time was hey, everything's good as long as you understand that I'm right. So I came from a premise of I thought communication was about making sure you understand what I was trying to say and what I was trying to tell you, and as long as you would just agree with the fact that I'm right, we were good.
And I'm the
Boy, did
boss.
I
You're
wreck some
not. Do what I tell
relationships.
you.
Boy, did I wreck some
Yes.
relationships.
You know, it just triggered a thought for me. Here I am on a mega church, a leader in the community on family ministries and those kind of things. And we're a downtown church in Jacksonville. And of course, a lot of homeless down there, right? See, a lot of what I learned, as you well know, came from pain. It came from
Mm-hmm.
studying the scripture.
Mm-hmm.
It came because I asked the Lord in 94 when I was a professor at Regent University. I said, I'm tired of being a Christian. And the Spirit said to me, you know my word, you don't know my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, then I want to know your heart. He said, you don't get my heart, you develop it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, okay. So we have opportunities to develop it. This was one of the two in my life that shook me to be different. There was a homeless lady downtown. She would always walk the streets, Wayne, schizophrenic, dirty, talk to herself, smoke, and you see her month after month down there. But one day I was looking at her, and I'm not proud of the story, but I had a feeling of disgust as I looked at her. And as I had that feeling of disgust watching her walk down past what we call Garage 2, parking garage, Holy Spirit put an image in between me and her of a little girl about 3, 4 years old, white dress, blondish hair. And the Spirit said, that's how I see her. Why can't you? Whoa. So I said, then I want to see her the way you do. He said, then you have to meet her. Well, you tend to forget those things, don't you? Months go by. It was a Sunday night before Christmas. It was like 99 or 2000. And there she was sitting on a park bench at the little park there at Garage 2. And I saw her sitting there. I was late to church. I was kind of getting church had already started. And I was uniform of the day at this church was you're in a suit. You wear a suit. So I'm in my suit and I saw her. The Spirit said, there she is. I said, I'm late to church. He said, there she is. Like, fine, I'll go. So I go meet this lady. Now I will say she was there to teach me. I had nothing to give her. Her name was Ellen, and Wayne, for whatever reason, she tells me about her life. Molested from the time she was 5 years old, all her life. The abuse and the molestations were so bad, she started drinking at around 11 or 12, doing drugs. And as I'm listening to this horrendous story, it hits me. No kid grows up going, hey, of all my choices, I could be a drug addicted, homeless person, schizophrenic, walking the streets of Jacksonville.
Mm.
And in the conversation, she said something. She said, I'm a non person. And I thought, okay, she's off her meds. And Spirit said, ask what she means by that. And I said, Ellen, what do you mean by that? She says, I don't exist. I said, what do you mean by that? Listen to what she told me, Wayne.
Mm.
She said, I have walked past you people meaning the church people. I have walked past you people every week for over a year. You never see me. You never look me in the eye. You don't notice me. I'm a non-person. And I teared up, as I am doing now. And the Holy Spirit said to me, I'm not impressed that you go to church in that building when you walk past the Ellens of the world. Because it's only when you do it to the least of these, Rick, then you did it to me. And in that moment, I was at a deep level of humility. And I thought, you know what? I'm not really that loving, am I? When I walk past the Ellens of the world as if they don't exist, judging them, looking at them with disgust, and all Father saw was their dignity. He saw the wounded little girl who'd been molested for years, but here I am judging her based on the outward experience with never getting to know her. It transformed me. From that day forward, I thought, I will never treat people like that again. Mm. But it was those kinds of experiences that I had to face the truth about who I was.
Yeah.
My pride, unconsciously arrogant. I'm better than you. No, you're not, Rick. In a sense, she was freer than me.
Wow.
Wow. Because I was bound up in all this religiosity that it kept me from really building deep, intimate relationships until I really moved to humility in a deeper way.
Wow.
And started to see people for who, not for what I see on the outside, but I see them as Father sees them.
Yeah. Wow. What a powerful story.
I think great leaders know that. They live that way. Mm-hmm. That's why Jesus could look at people and go, you don't know their story. I do.
Yeah.
And that's why Wayne is such a great leader. He was not quick to judge. Mm-hmm. He's quick to love.
Yeah.
With healthy boundaries, but he was quick to love.
Yeah.
Give grace.
That's right.
Be patient and kind.
That's right. And so may we become the people that do that. And as we wrap up, I just want to kind of add it, because that really is we have lots of definitions for this thing we call disciple. And we have all kinds of definitions, but in its essence and at its core, to be a disciple was to set the person who became the disciple set their intention on becoming just like the rabbi, just like them, and so Jesus and the scripture's clear that God's goal, his goal is that we're being transformed into
Amen.
Jesus's image. And that's what it means to be a disciple, is to be transformed into his image, into his likeness. And so I really appreciate this conversation, because we help. Go ahead, Doctor. Go ahead.
I just want to, and I'm not discounting. I like to say it a little differently.
Yeah.
The heart of the gospel, in my personal opinion, has one goal: is to mature us in love.
Yeah.
Is to mature us in love, and that every year you're more loving than you were the year before, which means I have to become more mature emotionally, spiritually, intellectually. I become more patient and more kind. In all of those forms. The goal to disciple someone is to mature them in love. Why? So they can represent Abba Father's heart well to the world.
Yeah.
And not misrepresent it.
Well said, my friend. I really, what a great conversation, and I'm so thankful. Thank you for your time. And by the way, just as a reminder, I'm gonna include links to Dr. Marks's website. I'm also gonna include a link. He recommended a book during our conversation, and I'll get the title of that, and I will make sure that I have a link to that book on humility that he mentioned. And so we really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to future conversations with you, Dr. Marks, and really
me as well, my friend.
Here, sir. Appreciate you being here. Well, everybody, thank you for joining us for this episode of the MinistryBuilders.Church podcast. I pray that this conversation has enriched you and helps you to grow as a person, as a leader, as those of us who are followers of Jesus. And so, because our heart and passion is for the local church, that we would just become those people who help to make more disciples and grow more leaders and empower more people for this work of ministry, which is all about growing in love. Just as Jesus said, they'll know you're my disciples because it'll be seen in how you love one another. So, hey, be sure to share this with somebody that you think would benefit from this. Subscribe, like, and until next time, God bless you. We'll see you then.